Yes, as Greg said, my name is Jessica Schwarz. I'm here on behalf of the Freedom Road Socialist organization, and thanks again to Workers' World Party for so graciously inviting us to come speak today. I'm going to be talking about Marxism and the labor movement. I feel like many of my comrades on this panel have addressed a lot of points on this already, but I'm going to provide some more context and information on that topic. And so, first of all, why is it important to understand Marxism in order to understand the labor movement? Don't worry, I'm not going to whip out my copy of Das Kapital and just start reading it. This is a short section. Marx wrote Wage, Labor, and Capital, and that is where the foundation of our understanding of political economy comes from, whereas the worker sells their labor power to the capitalist as a commodity, and the wages that we receive are not obviously based on what we actually produce, but rather the predetermined by the capitalist class by what they think our labor power is worth. And yeah, boo, that's an appropriate reaction. And so essentially, as we all, most of us here know, but maybe for some perhaps newer people who don't, the work that we put in is not to our benefit. It is only for the profit and well-being of the capitalist class. And that is why it's important for us to have this understanding as Marxists when looking at the labor movement as a history as well as the labor movement today. What does that look like at the moment? So as we've seen recently, there has been an upsurge of various teacher walkouts and strikes, as we've seen in West Virginia when a whole entire state was shut down, and they, through their strike, were able to actually win a raise through their strike, as well as what we've seen in Arizona, which was the nation's largest labor action, which came to a close actually just this Wednesday, as part of the hashtag was Red for Ed, which is a very interesting hashtag, but I won't get into that. But so after a week of 75,000 educators and allies flooded the Capitol in Phoenix, there was the decision to return to schools as the governor signed the education portion of the state budget, which guaranteed or proposed a 10% raise for teachers this upcoming school year. And then something a little bit more closer to home is obviously in Jersey City, where more than 1,000 teachers and other school workers held a strike in protest of rising healthcare costs, which as socialists we would think like basic healthcare is a right, but under capitalism, like basically every other resource, healthcare is seen as a commodity and not a necessity. And also what was important about this was the ability for the school workers and teachers to get the students involved, and I think that this is another reason why being involved in the labor movement is so crucial, because if we're talking here about wanting to engage the youth, then this is one way to do that, and to advance students while they're young so that they can maybe have that initial interest in like progressive ideas, but then through being part of these strikes, we can definitely make some effective change and raise their class consciousness as well. And then another issue that's really important for us to tackle is the issue of right to work, which we are seeing right now with the case of Janice v. AFSCME. And, again, a lot of people here probably know about it, but the case of Mark Janice, who is a public Illinois employee who is refusing or wants to refuse to pay union dues as it is his infringement on First Amendment rights. But as we all here can attest to, even people who are not in unions benefit from the struggles of the union workers because it raises the conditions for all workers. So. Unions have been at the forefront of the struggle of the working class movement, and so even if you decide not to be in a union or pay your dues while benefiting from them, then that's kind of messed up. And as Marxists, it's not merely enough for us to simply acknowledge the labor movement and its successes, but to rather engage in it. And how do we, as Marxist-Leninists, do so? And this is where through Lenin, we get the expansion upon Marxism, which is the issues such as trade unionism. I think Larry addressed this very well in his speech as well. But we have to tackle issues such as economism, which is limiting the workers' fight to the immediate economic demands. And it is not merely enough to point out the immediate economic conditions, but to draw it out to the system that creates the conditions to begin with. And this is a huge issue in taking politics away from the labor movement, where there's such a focus on, what we just need right now is important, and then the other issues, such as national oppression and imperialism, are seen as unnecessary, whereas they are both having a very anti-imperialist and anti-national oppression framework as members of the working class is vital to all of our liberation. And so what does the Marxist theory of revolution look like within the labor movement? And so two things that are crucial to us as Marxists within the labor movement are transformation and fusion. Whereas, it's very easy for people just to be like, the working class is important, they're the leaders of the revolution, but what does that really look like? It's not just about lecturing people about the importance of the working class, it's being members and an active, advanced element within the working class. And so, what does transformation entail? Well, as someone who went to college, going into it thinking, wow, I'm just gonna get a college degree and I can run a nonprofit and have these very petty bourgeois aspirations. Something that's very important is for us to understand that the struggle is within the working class, and one way to do that is by joining a union and organizing the militant rank and file workers and struggling with them side by side and not just lecturing at them from ivory towers, and being ready to fight management and the union bureaucrat sellouts. And another aspect, because through transformation, another thing that's important is fusion, which is fusing Marxism-Leninism with the working class to build class struggle. Because as I mentioned earlier, it is not merely enough for us to oppose the immediate economic conditions, but to extend that out to the system, because I think it's very crucial for people to understand that it's not merely a tax on our wages or conditions as workers, but understanding the international aspect of it as well. And the way to do this is through building a vanguard party, and Lenin, in What Is to Be Done, who expanded upon the ideas of Marx, combated this idea of spontaneity, where there's such a focus on just these small immediate battles, and again not connecting it back to the generalities, in which Lenin actually described this, or spontaneity, as consciousness in embryonic form. And so it's not enough just to follow the masses in their demands, but to take the ideas and advance them, and drawing them out to the generalities of the system. So say if you're on waging a struggle for higher wages, it's not merely enough to just be we want higher wages and that's it, but for us as Marxists within the movement, and then drawing it out, being well, why are they doing this? Why are our wages this way? And why do we face this repression? And it's not just because we're workers, but because of this entire ugly system that is exploiting our labor power for their benefit, and also tie up into other issues. And so, for example, Philando Castile was a Teamster worker, and tying back into, that's another example of which we can tie the immediate struggles of the working class to the system as a whole, in which members of the working class who are African American or other oppressed nationalities also face police violence, and also issues of immigration and other forms of violence. And so how do we then build this consciousness? In the way that we like to engage in this practice is through the mass line, which was through Mao. And so in order to build class consciousness, we need to have a correct approach to tactics and slogans Correct tactics involve the masses in struggle, and therefore we must proceed from what the masses want, combine that with our understanding of the needs and the overall political situation, and to do our work to mobilize the workers into active struggle. And we call this the mass line, as it was termed by the great Marxist-Leninist Mao Zedong, and because we need to have a correct approach to tactics, because it's not merely enough. Obviously, in our day-to-day workplaces, we might not always encounter people with the best ideas, and I think that obviously these are ideas that can be harmful, with whether they engage in national chauvinism, sexist chauvinism, homophobia, transphobia, any various types of chauvinism. It's not merely enough just to lecture at them, but to build class consciousness and have a correct approach to tactics and slogans. And to correct tactics involve the masses in struggle, and therefore we must proceed from what the masses want, combine that with our understanding of the needs and the overall political situation, and to do our work to mobilize the workers into active struggle. And that is, as I mentioned, what we call the mass line as set out by Mao Zedong. And I know that my speech was a little bit shorter, but I just wanted to kind of get to the nit and gritty of how Marxist-Leninists we should approach the labor movement and how we should engage with it. And again, thank you so much for inviting us to speak.